Good afternoon, Dr. Kasurirangan and Shriram Padsidharji and Dr. Mukul Das, Dr. Chako, Dr. Jitendra Singh, Shri Rao, and all other distinguished guests who are here. The Science and Technology and Innovation lecture series of Dr. Bansidhar has become very important because we are trying to get the best of the people to deliver a lecture which is very relevant in the present national context. The last lecture we had was on COVID, and that was the pandemic time, and it was at the peak of the pandemic that we had Dr. Neeraj Nishal give a wonderful talk. And today we are going to hear one of the most distinguished scientists of this country. The lecture will be on the need for a contemporary liberal education. Now, what more can be important for India than liberal education? India, the first thing, two important things which we have to tackle in our country, one is education, the other is health. Both these are extremely important for the people of this country. Today is a very important day for SRI to have Dr. Kasurirangan. Dr. Kasurirangan, thank you so much for accepting to give this lecture. The launch of PSLV, GSLV, and many other flagship programs of ISRO. He will be formally introduced by the director. I don't want to say all the details, but what I want to say that everybody knows Professor Kasurirangan because they hear the launch of PSLV and GSLV and so many programs. And of course, later on, his wonderful lectures on Chandrayaan. He's the architect of the new education policy. And also he will talk about the liberal education system and education becoming an integral part of the socio-economic development of this country. That is what he will be talking about. And I hope many of you have read the new education policy. I have seen the whole thing. It really explicitly brings out all these things which are relevant for our students, for senior students, for PhD scholars, for teachers, for women scientists, everybody. Incidentally, Dr. Kasurirangan, today is the International Women's Day, so you have to congratulate me. This is the fourth lecture I am delivering. I have already delivered 3 lectures since morning. So, friends, what I want to tell you, monumental contributions made by Dr. Kasurirangan. I know him personally. I know him in scientific world. I worked very closely with him when he was the president of the Indian Science Congress. Later on, when he came and we started a joint program on bioprospecting of bioresources of this country. It was a grand success program which Space and DBT started. And later on, when he became the president of the National Academy of Sciences. So I had the occasion to work very closely with him during his presidential tenure. All these things, Dr. Mukul Das, you will introduce about Professor Kasurirangan. But what I have to tell you is he is a par excellent human being. You can't find a better human being than him. Being an outstanding scientist, he's absolutely humble, he's absolutely down to earth, and he mixes up with everybody, and absolutely par excellent human being. You can't match that quality of him. When he was the president of Science Congress, I still remember when as soon as he'll come out of the car, all the children will run to him and they'll say, "Sir, we want your autograph. Sir, you remember Dr. Kasurirangan? We want your autograph. We want your autograph." And it used to be such a pleasure to see that someone like him is the president of the Indian Science Congress. So I have really great pleasure in welcoming him to this excellent program we have started with the help of Shri Alok Bansidharji. And I feel the Shri Ram Institute will really touch some new heights in science, technology, and innovation once we continue to invite such great speakers as Dr. Kasturi Rangan and listen to their lecture. Most warm welcome, Dr. Kasturi Rangan. I can't tell you how happy I am to see you after such a long time. Thank you. So now I will invite Dr. Shri Alok Shriramji, the Vice Chairman of the Board of Shri Ram Institute, to talk about the lecture series, Science, Technology and Innovation. Please, Alok Shriramji.
Thank you. Esteemed Kasturi Rangan, Mrs. Manju Sharma, Honorable Governors, Dr. Mukul Das, Mr. K. N. Rao, Dr. K. M. Chako, Dr. Jatinder Singh, ladies and on Women's Day, let me start by conveying best wishes to all the ladies to achieve their dreams. Celebrating the birthday, the memory of Dr. Bansidhar on his 91st birth anniversary, which falls on the 7th of March, and what an appropriate day for the occasion. We mark this by none than Professor K. Kasturi Rangan, the leading force behind through education, the NEP 2020. The subject of his lecture is the need for a contemporary liberal education. All of us are aware that the ancient Indian universities like Takshashila and Nalanda imparted the highest quality of education. Their approach was steeped in the liberal art philosophy. The system produced some of the most eminent dawns of ancient India, like Panini, Chandragupta Maurya, Aryabhatta, and many others. Professor K. Kasturi Rangan was heading ISRO for a decade from 1994 to 2003. A scientist par excellence, he has changed track to Indian best gift one generation can give the next, that gift of education. Normally, a scientist promote maths and physics and other sciences, subjects which are bound by rules. Our learned has chosen to speak on liberal education. It is important to impart youth youngsters the ability to think out of the box and look at problems from new angles. This will bring new and radical solutions to problems faced by society. Liberal education aims at the development of young minds, integrating learning across curriculum and between academic and experimental learning, thus being a holistic person. Up to the undergraduate level, before launching into higher education, when one develops deep expertise in any one of the specific fields of the individual's choice. Generally, liberal education transcends rules and boundaries. Our classical music is a case in point, where music is bound by many rules, so that the music by one artist is similar to that of another. However, Indian classical music allows for each artist to interpret and render music as they see fit within a broad framework. That is why each raga has many versions. Education and research were subjects very close to Dr. Bansidhar's. Always endeavored to encourage researchers and educators during his time as Vice Chairman of the Board of Governors of Sri Ram Institute, spanning over 3 decades. Today, as we remember Dr. Bansidharji, it is worth recounting that he contributed a great deal in various areas for growth of the industry, education, and industrial research were his special loves. He was the president of PhD Chamber of Commerce and Industry Sugar Mills Association, Indian Chemical Manufacturers Association, Indian Development Association, amongst others. He was a member of the governing council and treasurer of Sri Ram College of Commerce and chairman of Lady Sri Ram College, member of the governing committee of Indian International Center, chairman of Indraprastha College, on the Foundation, and chairman of the Indian Association for Deaf and Dumb, and many other social and educational organizations. His simplicity and intense compassion was visible in his efforts to help all. He was caring, always ready to lend his wise counsel and render help to those who approached him. He was a person with rare compassion, especially for scientists, whom he always placed above all others. After hearing Dr. Manju Sharma, I feel that he would have really enjoyed meeting Dr. Kasturi Rangan because they are built from the same mold. Sri Ram Institute, which Sir Sri Ram founded and Dr. Bansidhar nurtured, is still carrying on the vision of these illustrious personalities. It is society and should be impacted positively and be benefited from science and technology that is rooted in Indian soil and founded in our long traditions that burn bright through the ages. Today's lecture is the second in the Bansidhar Technology and Innovation Lecture Series. We are looking into the best ways to deliver a liberal arts education, the need for multidisciplinary environments and institutions, breaking silos within universities, creation of imaginative curriculum and pedagogy that serve as a foundational base for rigorous specialization in chosen disciplines and fields in order to develop deeper expertise in one or more subjects. In closing, I would say that the past was India's, the last few centuries were taken by others, but I believe very strongly that the future will again be by Indians. Let's bet on our youngsters to make this a reality. With this, I would like to close my brief introduction. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you will.
Thank you. Thank you, Arogji, for this very nice introduction. And I will now request Dr. Mukul Vas, the director of the Institute, to introduce our great speaker. Dr. Mukul Das.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sharma, ma'am, Sri Alok Sri Ramji, Sri K. and Raoji, Dr. Jiten Singh, and most respected Professor Kasturi Ranganji, ladies and gentlemen. At this eagerly awaited occasion, my task is to welcome our esteemed speaker for today, Padma Vibhushan, Professor Krishnaswamy Kasturi Ranganji, who needs no introduction. He has been the multifaceted luminary, and just who does not know about his contributions to science, to scientific, educational, and technological advancement that he has ushered in. The latest in the long list is India's new education policy, for which the Union Cabinet gave assent in July 2020. He headed the panel and drafted the policy in 2019, and subsequently the draft went through a number of public consultations before receiving the final government approval. Before I come to the importance and the relevance of the topic on which Professor Kasturi Rangan is going to speak on, that is the need for contemporary liberal education, a bit about the context at which we are having this webinar. This is the second lecture of the Dr. Bansidhar Science, Technological and Innovation Lecture Series, in which, as Sri Alok Sri Ramji has already elaborated, we are taking up topics which are important to us as a scientific community, issues that touch us all and then determine the course of our future. Today we are commemorating the memory of Dr. Bansidhar on his birth anniversary, and today's topic pays an apt tribute to his memory, as he was a man who had education and research very close to his heart. He was the constant guiding force behind Sri Ram Institute and always encouraged researchers and educators during his time as vice chairman of the board of governors of Sri Ram Institute, spanning over a period of 3 decades. Now, many of us like to recollect Professor Kasturi Ranganji as former head of Indian Space Research Organization, which he guided from 1994 to 2003. And during that time, the country's space program witnessed several major milestones. He was the project director for India's first 2 experimental Earth observation satellites, Bhaskar 1 and 2, and then went on to the new generation spacecrafts, that is the Indian National Satellite, that is INSAT-2, and Indian Remote Sensing Satellites, IRS-1A and 1B. He also led the initiative for India to enter the planetary exploration era by extensive studies that led to the Chandrayaan-1 project. These efforts have put India as a preeminent space-faring nation among the handful of 6 countries that have major space programs. Now, besides his contributions to India's space sciences, Professor Kasturi Rangan is presently the Chancellor of Central University of Rajasthan and NIIT University as well. He was the Chancellor of JNU and the Chairman of Karnataka Knowledge Commission. He was also the Director of National Institute of Advanced Studies, Bangalore from 2004 to 2009. He is a recipient of honorary doctorate degrees from as many as 27 universities of the country and was a former member of Rajya Sabha from 2003 to 2009. Today's talk by him is based on the spirit of several discussions which the educationists, academics, and other intellectuals in the Committee of National Education Policy. The ideas that have been conveyed in the policy has been receiving high level of acceptance across the educational institutions of our country. When put to operation in future, it could be a game changer in the context of not only improving job opportunities, but also to create capabilities with respect to 21st century skills and with all-round development of individuals. I'm thankful to all of you for sparing your valuable time to join us today. And I'm sure that this is going to be a very enriching time listening to Professor Rangan. With these words, I would like you to once again welcome and request Professor Kasturi Rangan to deliver the talk. Thank you, Professor Kasturi Rangan, please.
Professor Manju Sharma, Sri Alok Sriram, Dr. Mukul Vas, Dr. K.M. Chakho, distinguished invitees, dear students, ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to be with all of you to deliver the second webinar of the lecture series instituted in the memory of late Dr. Sri Bansidhar, who nurtured, the Sri Ram Institute of Industrial Research, founded by the legendary Sri Ram over the last 3 decades to bring it to its present level of eminence. I would like to express my grateful thanks to Sri Alok Sriram, Vice Chairman, Sri Mukul Das, the present Director of the Institute, and his predecessor, Dr. K.M. Chakko, for extending to me to this privilege. Late Dr. Bansidhar has been a man of wide-ranging interests, encompassing scientific research, institution building, has been a man of, I'm so sorry, has been a man of wide-ranging interests, encompassing scientific research, institution building, being a source of inspiration for young scientific talents, I have a little problem with my terminal because it's also, okay. 1 minute, you should excuse me because sometimes, yeah. Okay. Okay. As you know, the Dr. Bansidhar has been a man of wide-ranging interests, encompassing scientific research, institution building, being a source of inspiration for young scientific talents, mentoring educational institutions, and promoting social activities. He is very much respected, not only among the community belonging to the Sri Ram Institute for Industrial Research and other associated institutions, but also across the country for his multi-dimensional roles to improve several complex societal problems. Instituting Dr. Bansidhar Science, Technology and Innovation Sector Series is indeed a very thoughtful step by the management of the Institute. It is certainly a fitting tribute to this great visionary who has done much for the several noble causes as a part of national development and uplifting the society. I'd like to congratulate Sri Alok Sriram, Vice Chairman, Board of Governors of SRI, for this laudable initiative. I take this opportunity to express my gratitude to my valued long-term colleague, Dr. Manju Sharma, who is presently the chairperson of this institute and who suggested that I deliver this lecture. Of course, once he tells this, there is no question of saying no. I should say this very clearly. Dr. Manju Sharma, of course, I would like to use this opportunity, Dr. Manju Sharma, to greet you on the World's Women's Day. I know you really symbolize the true womanhood and what you have done for this country and elsewhere, not only for science, science management, and for the society, is to be really experienced. I can't go into the details of that part of it. The only thing I can say is that yourself and myself, we work together in several collaborative efforts over decades. One of the earliest is when Dr. Manju Sharma was the Secretary, Department of Biotechnology, and myself, the Chairman ISRO, when we executed the landscape level map of the biodiversity of the country. The need for it was effectively articulated by Dr. Manju Sharma. Subsequently, we shaped together several scientific programs, including organization of meetings, conferences, defining projects, etc. And most importantly, when I was elected as the president of the National Academy of Sciences of India, here also she played a very important role to make sure they accept this major responsibility of the National Academy of Sciences of India. I also mentioned that Professor Manju Sharma and myself had the good fortune of being mentored by the doyen of Indian space, Professor M.G.K. Menon. We both can never forget him in any forum. The extraordinary vision that he had and the way he imparted to us some of his thought processes is something that has carried us forward in the later part of our life. I may also mention that in the formulation of the National Education Policy 2020, I had invited Dr. Manju Sharma for consultation. She came along with her colleagues from the National Academy of Sciences, and they gave the very valuable inputs with regard to certain aspects of higher education and dealing with the use of education for addressing the societal problems. I remember all these to give you a flavor of the kind of interaction I was privileged to have with Dr. Manju Sharma. All I can say at this point is that this institute is sure to derive major gains of the visionary ideas of Professor Manju Sharma. And I thank you using this opportunity for the extraordinary association that we had together. For today's talk, I've chosen the topic, the need for contemporary liberal education. As you all know, the present government of Honorable Sri Narendra Modi ji has announced the new education policy NEP 2020 that will shape the education landscape of this country in the next 2 decades and perhaps even beyond. One of the major highlights of this policy is to give thrust to a more imaginative and broad-based liberal education as a foundation for holistic development of all students. There is tremendous interest among different levels of stakeholders in bringing this aspect of education into the mainstream of our academic system, especially at the secondary school and undergraduate education level. Taking due cognizance of the deep interest of Dr. Bansidhar on matters of education, scientific research, and more generally human resource development, and this was very well articulated by Sri Ramji. I may only say, Alokji, I may only say that this new dimension, particularly an emphasis at the undergraduate level of liberal education, should be of interest to a wide range of stakeholders, students, teachers, educationists, policymakers, including those involved in professional and vocational education. This talk has been shaped by exchanging ideas with a few colleagues whom I would like to briefly acknowledge. I owe my grateful thanks to Professor Viraj Kumar for his assistance in synthesizing points drawn from numerous sources and for suggesting a logical way of sequencing these points. I should say it was not an easy task to build up a coherent picture of what a liberal education is. We are being exposed also for the first time on the subject, and there are many subtle points that need to be brought out. And I would like to remember and recall the association and support of Viraj Kumar in this connection. I also gratefully acknowledge the pivotal role played by Professor Manjul Bhargav, a Princeton University field medalist who was a member of our committee, and Professor Anurag Bair, who is the Vice Chancellor of the Simpremji University, who together really worked as played a pivotal role in drafting the sections of the policy on liberal education in the National Education Policy 2020 and ensuring that subsequent revisions to these key sections accurately reflected the committee's views. And with these few words of thanks, let me now start the actual material that I would like to present to you. We humans are insatiably curious. At every opportunity, we seek to expand both the breadth and depth of our understanding of our world, and of course, the worlds beyond. In every ancient civilization, this thirst for understanding and meaning has found a rich expression in religion. So it's unsurprising that many of the great centers of learning originated as monasteries. In our part of the world, the universities of Takshashila and Nalanda again was mentioned by Sri Alokji, are perhaps the most famous. From the little we know about the systems of education in these ancient universities, we can say with certainty that their quest for knowledge is not partitioned in the manner we are accustomed to into disciplines, each with its own way of making sense of the world and discovering truths. It's worth remembering that the truths we are trying to discover are much older than the formulation of disciplines, and the interconnections between these truths need not align with the interconnections we have set up between disciplines. To the best of our knowledge, the truths of the discipline we call physics came into being with a Big Bang. some 13.5 billion years ago. The truth of chemistry, which is based on physical truths, emerged some 300 millennia later as the universe cooled and coalesced into atoms and then molecules. The truths of biology did not emerge for another 9 billion years when certain molecules combined based on their physical and chemical properties to form organisms. The interconnections between these science disciplines broadly reflects the interconnections between the underlying truths. Theories in chemistry rest on theories in physics, and biological theories are ultimately grounded in theories of physics and chemistry. This fairly clean picture gets muddled when we talk of disciplines such as human history, which began a mere 70,000 years back with the formation of complex cultures. How do the truths of this discipline entwine with the truths of, say, geography? Some of you may have read Jared Diamond's book, Guns, Germs, and Steel. When this was published in 1998, it sparked considerable controversy by suggesting a strong influence of geography on the unfolding of history. For instance, according to Diamond's hypothesis, geographic factors made it far more likely that Europeans would conquer North and South America rather than other way around. The fact that elements of this controversy still rage reflects our lack of clarity on the interconnections between geographical and historical truths. The underlying unity of these truths has been recognized from at least the time of the ancient Greeks. In the previous century, Albert Einstein metaphorically spoke of religions, arts, and sciences as branches of the same tree. This metaphor suggests a unified trunk, but it ultimately also evokes a mental picture of the branches of knowledge splitting off and growing further apart from each other. This incorrect mental image is reinforced when we introduce boundaries between disciplines by constraining their objects of study, their established expected theoretical traditions, and their fostered consensus on valid forms of evidence, interpretation, and explanation. The concept of liberal arts literally means a liberal notion of the arts, and it explicitly rejects the notion that these branches are separate. As we have stated in the policy, the purpose and importance of a liberal arts education, especially today, is to enable students to explore the numerous remarkable intertwined relationships that exist among the sciences and the humanities, mathematics and arts, medicine and physics, etc., and more generally, to explore the surprising unity of all fields of human endeavor. Early scholars were adept at such exploration, guided simply by their curiosity. Aryabhatta I, for instance, discovered truths in mathematics, in astronomy, and in disciplines that were only just being defined. Why did we abandon the liberal arts approach for a seemingly closeted, discipline-based approach? Quite simply, the discipline-based approach has been highly effective in advancing human knowledge and understanding over the last few centuries. As an example, look no further than the remarkably quick development of the effective vaccines to combat the COVID-19 pandemic. You may remember that in February 2020, the World Health Organization said it did not expect a vaccine, SARS-CoV-2, in less than 18 months. Yet, and it could be even further. It could be even years. That is what was I thought about at one time. Yet here we are, just 13 months later, with over 2 crore people vaccinated in India alone. The successful development of these vaccines has been thanks to the tireless efforts from experts across numerous disciplines, from bioinformatics for identifying the genetic sequence of this deadly virus, to computational biology for identifying potentially efficacious vaccines, to chemical engineering to develop vaccines at sufficient scale for critical trials, to actually conducting these trials, and then to full-scale industrial development of these vaccines. However, these experts have been able to work largely within their well-defined silos before handing off to experts from other disciplines at well-understood points in the overall vaccine development process. This is the hallmark of multidisciplinarity, and I will expand this on this term later in my talk. For now, I want to point out that despite having served us so well so long, there is enough evidence that disciplinary or even multidisciplinary approaches alone cannot satisfy our thirst for knowledge in the 21st century. Why? Because increasingly we are grappling with problems that are too broad or complex to be adequately tackled within a single discipline or cannot be broken up and handed to experts from several disciplines. This is not the first time we have tried to deal with such problems, but an increasing number of problems we are faced with are of this nature. An example of such a problem that we are all familiar is the climate change. Obviously, the goal of school and undergraduate education cannot be to train young minds to successfully solve problems that challenge professionals. But there are key elements of the process that professionals follow, which young students can and must be exposed to. This can only be done by broadening the single discipline approach. What are some of these key elements that our education system should focus on? A critical element is, of course, dear communication, clear communication. We often have to solve broad, complex problems in teams where each member brings certain expertise to the table. Each of these members must be able to communicate effectively, not only with experts within their own discipline, using a rich and shared discipline-specific vocabulary, but with others of the team who do not possess this vocabulary. Language fluency is obviously a key element, and so too are critical and analytic reasoning, partly because these skills can help individuals rapidly expand an initially narrow shared vocabulary and thereby communicate more effectively. Effective communication between humans goes well beyond vocabulary. Of course, it includes an understanding of the diverse cultures, perceptiveness, and sensitivity to different perspectives. Thus, there are also key elements like naturally cooperation and collaboration are also key elements for effective teamwork. Are we giving our students enough opportunities to develop these skills in a discipline-specific approach? Let me share a personal story some years ago when I was a student. In 1963, I joined Physical Research Laboratory, Ahmedabad, and had the opportunity to work with Dr. Vikram Sarabhai. His views on how to onboard young researchers, such as myself, was quite unique for the time, but reflecting on it now, I see that Sarabhai foresaw the inadequacies of the disciplinary approach even then. Instead of tying me to a desk to work solo on problems in theoretical physics and remaining bound to that single discipline, he described experimental system that I would need to build working with fellow students. There were a series of increasingly sophisticated sensors that would be carried to high altitudes by balloons to study cosmic phenomena that are undetectable at ground level because of the blanketing effect of our thick atmosphere. My task was to design these sensors from scratch, and I mean literally from scratch, right from manually winding wires for the voltage transformers to cutting, shaping, and bending metal to house the equipment, to the glass blowing to create gas tubes and filling them with argon and methane as sensors. This forced me to use my hands to seek help from others and to help them in turn. I was also obliged to bring to bear every facet of my technical and scientific knowledge, from basic electronics to materials to electrochemistry to understanding the physical basis of gaseous discharge, quite apart from the astrophysical context in which the experiment was being conducted. Sarabhai believed that to truly understand complex system, it is essential to grasp the fundamentals of several disciplines, not just one. And the best way to demonstrate this grasp was to building a device that relied critically on a clear understanding of these fundamentals. Some 3 decades later, when I was chairman of ISRO, I was able to fully appreciate the wisdom of Sarabhai's approach. It gave me confidence to ask probing discipline-specific questions to engineers from various specialized domains, including several domains that were not my forte, and to understand their answers. In doing so, we collectively attempted to assess whether the complex space system we are assembling would perform as expected. Several years later, I was tasked with chairing a committee to examine a system that was even more complex, the Western Ghat ecosystem, in order to make meaningful recommendations regarding the preservation and conservation strategy of this delicate mountainous ecosystem. Our committee had to understand it from multiple perspectives. Among others, this included its rich biodiversity, its hydrological systems, its geological and geomorphological characteristics, climate variations, coupled with impacts of human interventions, and the sociological, cultural, ecological, and economic aspects of the proposed strategies for sustainable development. We also had to leverage the latest technologies for geospatial analysis to answer questions that would guide our decision making. Added to this was the need to understand the complex political landscape. Keep in mind that the Western Ghats spans 6 states, and hence any implementation of policies demands political consensus. Given the sheer range of disciplines involved, every member of our committee had to learn a little of each of the unfamiliar discipline. So these are some of my own experiences at the time when I was asked to chair the committee to draft the national education policy. Until then, I had never had an opportunity to examine the merits or demerits of a disciplinary approach versus a liberal approach in a formal academic context. However, I had an inkling that our existing education system was not doing enough to prepare students to tackle the types of challenges that the world was throwing our way. The committee itself consisted of eminent academics, and I was delighted to learn that erudite academicians in India and all over the world who have strongly articulated the need for a liberal approach. To quote one such academic, and I want to bring this name, Saikat Mazumdar, who is a professor at Ashoka University in Delhi and also formerly taught at Stanford, and I would like to quote, "This is really no such thing as liberal arts subject. Any subject can be taught as one as long as it is not being used as professional training for a particular kind of career." So economics is a liberal art, while accountancy is not. Biology is a liberal art, while medicine is not. English is a liberal art, while journalism is not. A liberal arts education, however, is a very distinctive thing. It is an engagement with or more of fundamental disciplines in combination with a broad exposure to multiple disciplinary ways of thinking. If single subject-based education processes produces I-shaped student, a liberal arts education produces a T-shaped student. I stands for the depth in the subject, while T combines depth with range. Exposure to multiple disciplinary ways of thinking is a joy in or by and of itself for any learner, particularly for you youngsters who are present here in this audience, perhaps because it's strongly associated with your holistic mental development. A liberal arts education enables you to truly develop both sides of your brain, both the creative artistic side and the analytic side on the other side. No education system should deprive you of this joy or this opportunity to develop holistically. Apart from being a joy, it's increasingly clear that the 21st century will demand greater flexibility in ways of thinking, and this can only come through greater exposures to diverse way of thinking. Steve Jobs famously remarked that Macintosh would never have happened but for the calligraphy class he took in the college. Obviously, Job was not referring to the specifics of that one calligraphy class, but how to sensitize him more broadly to aesthetics and still more broadly to the power of multiple perspectives. To design his computers, he therefore built teams that were not only consisted of top-notch engineers, but also included computer scientists who were also musicians and poets, and artists and zoologists and historians. Steve Jobs was certainly not the first person with such ideas, nor too was the next outstanding individual. I would like to discuss in this context Leonardo da Vinci, the Renaissance genius. One of Da Vinci's most famous works, and I'm sure many of you know, is The Vitruvian Man. This is partly a self-portrait with beautiful curls and perfect shading. To ensure that he drew the body exactly to proportion, Da Vinci made 230 measurements before even putting a pen on the paper. Thus, while many of his peers were content with line drawings, Da Vinci work embodies a staggering degree of scientific sophistication. According to the biographer Walter Isaacson, one reason to be learned from Da Vinci is to embrace many fields of knowledge and passion. Often, we fail to be creative because we think too narrowly. Leonardo would just wonder, what does a woodpecker's tongue look like? And he wanted to know, not because it would help him to build a flying machine or paint a better painting, but because out of curiosity. All of that eventually leads to a spiritual feel for the patterns of the nature. But even if it doesn't lead you to someday to paint a Mona Lisa, it can still lead to a more enriching life. It is thus obvious that Da Vinci mastered the art of how to balance the business of being perfect with also being productive. You might argue that multiple disciplinary ways of thinking are encouraged even within our traditional disciplinary approach. After all, where would a physicist be without mathematics or a psychologist without biology? While this is generally true, there are clearly narrowly separated disciplines. They have often had a long shared history with regular exchange of ideas, as is the case with physics and mathematics. In Einstein's tree metaphor, we would not picture sharply diverging branches of physics and mathematics. What Da Vinci perhaps unconsciously strove for, and what Steve Jobs probably meant, is what Professor Masaikat Mazumdar calls contradisciplinary education, which pairs disciplines that are apparently divergent branches of the Einstein's tree, physics with philosophy or music with mathematics, while programs with such title may sound whimsical or even fluffy to those of us with a traditional disciplinary mindset. Contra-disciplinary programs have demonstrated that students graduate with a wider range of skills. In an uncertain world buffeted by pandemics, climate change, and technological advances such as artificial intelligence, graduates need this wider T-shaped range of skills. We already know forward that each person entering the job market today will look forward not only to several jobs, but also several careers during their working life. Thus, formal education system must provide graduates with a combination of transferable and uniquely human skills to help them adopt and continuously learn to work in this challenging environment. Designing such programs is obviously not a simple matter of offering a set of unrelated courses or even courses where some lectures examine a central theme from a perspective of one discipline or other lectures examine the same theme from the perspective of other disciplines. Thus, we need to use terms like multidisciplinarity carefully because they could technically apply to such courses and programs without capturing the spirit in which our national education policy uses this term. Before examining these terms in the educational context, let me illustrate them in a professional context because this is the eventual context in which we want graduates to be effective. Some problems are solved effectively by multidisciplinary teams of professionals, where each member brings his or disciplinary specific approach to the problem. The development of vaccines for COVID-19 is one such example. In the traditional process, experts from each discipline work sequentially on the various stages of vaccine development, which keeps cost to a minimum. Given the urgency of tackling this pandemic, however, these vaccines were developed in a more expensive manner where multidisciplinary teams worked concurrently on the problem. This is manageable as long as all disciplines agree on a common structure imposed by the problem and perhaps certain constraints on the solution. This agreed upon structure is sometimes called as interface. Software development is the computer people bring out. For example, the team may spend considerable time jointly designing the interface, more precisely an application programming interface or a API. Once the interface has been properly designed, the teams can split up, work with their own silos, and interface is explicitly meant to eliminate the need for members to communicate across disciplines. This approach does not work for all problems. However, in some cases, there is a clean separation of concerns via interfaces, and team members must communicate regularly across disciplines as they work jointly for their disciplinary perspective. This is often called as an interdisciplinary approach. In contrast to the multidisciplinary approach, it requires team members to integrate their discipline perspectives, their concepts, theories, and methods in order to solve the complex problems at hand. For example, our Western Ghats Committee would never have worked in a multidisciplinary manner. We primarily followed an interdisciplinary approach. There are still other problems which are even more interdisciplinary, where even interdisciplinary approach is insufficient. Instead, the team must adopt a transdisciplinary approach that is not only extends these approaches to generate fundamentally new conceptual frameworks, hypotheses, theories, models, and methodological applications that transcend their disciplinary origins. This approach is increasingly necessary in cutting-edge research, and it can lead to the emergence of new subdisciplines or even whole new disciplines. As an example, there's a fairly new discipline of traditional archaeology called the landscape archaeology, whereas traditional archaeology focuses on studying small-scale remnants of the past, ranging from fragments of a pottery to individual structures or at most a cluster of structures. Landscape archaeology expands the realm of study to include surrounding landscapes. These landscapes can hold either to undiscovered clues to the past that are detectable using remote sensing technologies. Transdisciplinary research in this context has led to the development of a new techniques to analyze remote sensing data after integrating it with other historical data drawn from old maps using GIS technologies. Interestingly, this transdisciplinary approach has led to new insights in the history of one of the iconic transdisciplinary institutions of the past in this country, namely Nalanda. By measuring the precise orientation of the sacred structures using satellite imagery, researchers have discovered that structures that were built later are tilted further away from the east-west line than earlier structures. To explain this, the researchers weave together insights from history and astronomy. And in doing so, they have aimed at surprising technique to date these structures. This in turn has advanced our knowledge because these sacred structures are difficult to date using traditional structures. Returning now to the educational context, it is clear that the key ingredient that must exist beyond a multidisciplinary approach is some degree of integration across disciplines. Let me explain this with a concrete example. Consider a course that helps students understand music from many disciplinary perspectives. A physics professor might lead some lectures explaining the physics of sound waves, frequency, amplitude, etc. Next, a psychology professor might discuss the emotional aspects of music and how music could influence mood and behavior. A history professor could demonstrate how music changes over time, how it is shaped by events of the time, how it can even influence some of these events. One can argue that such an course is multidisciplinary, but unless students have the opportunity to integrate ideas from the various lectures in some meaningful way by completing a project or writing a detailed essay, for instance, then students are unlikely to compare and contrast these varying perspectives. These student activities can be crafted only when the various professors coordinate how they plan to teach these classes, including by directly referencing each other's lectures to help students see the connections. Naturally, faculty will require specific training for this. It is clear that this will be a significant challenge in the short term simply because there are few people who have sufficient expertise to adequately train others. How can we effectively bootstrap such training? I will return to this important point in a few minutes. Here, let me just note that without appropriate faculty training, we are unlikely to have a meaningful integration, resulting in only superficial multidisciplinarity. This is unlikely to lead to the educational outcomes we desire, and I want to emphasize that the NEP's multidisciplinary approach about should not be interpreted in this superficial manner. Just before students enter higher education, they are given initial exposure to individual disciplines over the last 4 years of the secondary education, the grades 9 to 12. Thus, they are at a critical juncture as they enter their undergraduate programs. On the one hand, they are adequately prepared for integrative steps early in the liberal arts undergraduate program. On the other hand, in discipline-specific programs, which includes most professional programs, students are led deep within a specific domain as rapidly as possible. There is a tendency in such programs to minimize courses outside this discipline, reflecting a widespread belief that a graduate more domain-specific course is inherently more ready for a job on day one. This is unlikely to be true. Employers are generally far more interested in T-shaped rather than I-shaped graduates. They are fully aware that well-rounded individuals with a holistic education are better prepared to tackle complex problems while also understanding the needs, desires, and motivations of co-workers, clients, and the wider society. A liberal education seeks precisely these outcomes: strong written and oral communication skills, teamwork skills, ethical decision making, critical thinking, and the ability to apply knowledge in real world settings. In fact, even if industry did demand discipline, job readiness on day one, an overemphasis on a single discipline limits the individual's opportunities to hone long-term qualities of mind, such as inquisitiveness, perceptiveness, and the ability to extrapolate an idea to a new domain of purpose. All these are essential to ensure that the graduate retains professional flexibility to adopt and thrive in a rapidly changing world of work. That's why the policy states unequally, and I quote the policy here: the needs of the 21st century require the liberal, broad-based, multidisciplinary education become the basis for all higher education. This will help develop well-rounded individuals that possess critical 21st century capacities in fields across arts, humanities, sciences, social sciences, and professional, technical, and vocational crafts, an ethic of social engagement. Such a liberal education would be, in the long run, the approach across all undergraduate programs, including those in professional, technical, and vocational discipline. So how can institutions ensure the necessary degree of integration to go beyond mere multidisciplinarity. At least two models for integration have been proposed. For simplicity, I will call these a soft integration model and the strong integration model. The soft integration model is an evolution of the traditional disciplinary-based structure that most institutions follow today, where students typically major in one discipline but are all free to choose additional courses in other discipline, possibly leading to a minor. The crucial difference is that a certain proportion of the curriculum at the course level or at the program level must be reserved for dialogue between multiple disciplines and their respective methodologies. In the spirit of a true dialogue, the purpose must not be to overly challenge multiple viewpoints and choose a correct one, but to help students recognize the promise and the value in considering more than one viewpoint. These dialogues must include experts from each represented domain, and they can take several familiar forms, classroom discussions, seminars, workshops, etc. But these cannot be isolated events. While this mode is a pedagogy heavy, it can be complemented with multidisciplinary projects of similar complexity to traditional projects at the undergraduate level. In contrast, the strong integration model is a substantial departure from the traditional multidisciplinarity-based programs structure. Instead, programs are defined by critical but sufficiently broad problem areas such as clean energy or adult literacy or a heritage preservation. The fidelity is to the problem, not to one of disciplines. Indeed, relevant elements from any discipline that can help to understand and address the problem are fair game for inclusion in such a program. Thus, a clean energy program will probably include energy economics as well as host of electives that could be attuned to specific research in the areas. Throughout the search is for a solution or a better solution according to a relevant metric, recognizing that breakthroughs will often be interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary in nature. In contrast to the pedagogy-heavy soft integration model, the strong integration model will tend to be more research consultancy heavy. The policy rejects one-size-fits-all approach by recognizing the importance of institutional autonomy. It does not even compel institutions to immediately follow the liberal arts model. There will be a transition period, and during which time some institutions may pay more lip service to such a model or may develop flawed models based on the misunderstanding of the principles I have tried to articulate here. These institutions risk compromising not only the long-term growth of their institute graduates, but also their own survivability. However, I fully expect several institutions to successfully develop a variety of models of liberal education that truly empower their graduates. Prominent among those would be the model public universities for holistic and multidisciplinary education, at par with IITs and IIMs, etc., called MERUs, Multidisciplinary Education and Research Universities. These institutions will help set the highest standards for multidisciplinary education across India and will aim to attain the highest global standards in quality education at par of, for example, with the Ivy Leagues in the United States. They must also lead national efforts to train faculty transition from disciplinary to multidisciplinary program. I am convinced that the success of such institution will encourage others to follow suit. Thus, I expect to return in some ways to a model where education reminiscent of the earlier time, Bana Bhatta's Kadambari, written 1400 years ago, described a truly educated person as one who had mastered all the 64 kalas or arts, which included music, dance, painting, sculpture, languages, and literature, in addition to subjects such as engineering and mathematics, as well as vocational subjects. While the number and nature of these kalas will really differ, the principles will be largely the same. A comprehensive liberal arts education will develop all capacities of a human being, intellectual, aesthetic, social, physical, emotional, and moral in an integrated manner. It is individuals with these characteristics who will one day proudly call themselves Indians. And that, I am certain, will be the bedrock of a better India and a better world. Thank you. Good.
You have to unmute, please.
Dr. Sharma, you have to unmute, please.
Nothing could have been more inspirational, informative, and full of challenges the country has to do with the new education policy. I think the way you have presented, it's absolutely marvelous. Nobody can ask any question, nobody can challenge you, nobody can raise any point. So I would like Dr. Ken Rao to give a vote of thanks. We are most grateful to you for this wonderful talk. Dr. Rao.
Thank you, Madam. Honorable Professor Kasturi Ranganji, Dr. Manju Sharma Madam, Shri Alok Shri Ramji, Dr. Mukul Das, Dr. Chako, Dr. Jatendra Singh Ji, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sure that all of us here will agree with me that it was indeed a deeply enriching experience listening to our esteemed speaker, Professor Kasturi Rangan. I, on behalf of the Institute of Industrial Research, which organized this event as a part of Dr. Bansidar's Science, Technology and Innovation Lecture Series, thank you, Professor Kasturi Ranganji, for giving this engrossing talk. The timing of this lecture assumes paramount importance, as this is the 91st birth anniversary year of Dr. Bansidhar, a doyen of Indian industry and a leading promoter of education during the time. Today, we learned deeper nuances and the implications of the India's new education policy from none other than our esteemed speaker, Padma Vibhushan, Professor Krishna Swami Kasturi Rangan, who himself headed the policy, who drafted the policy in 2019 and successfully sent it through the number of public consultations and led it to the parliamentary process, which gave assent subsequently. On behalf of the Board of Governors and the entire Sri Ram Institute fraternity, I thank you, sir, for gracefully accepting our offer to deliver this valuable lecture, the second of the Bansidhar Science, Technology and Innovation series. I must thank Dr. Manju Sharma ji, Madam, for chairperson, and Alok Sriram ji, our vice chairman, and all the members of the Board of Governors for their constant guidance and motivation, the result of which is this series of lectures. I must thank the dedicated and tireless work of Dr. Mukul Das, director, and the team that ultimately made this program a reality. Today is an International Women's Day. We have strong and valuable contributions coming from Dr. Manju Sharma ji and Ladali Khatum, from PhD. Thank you, madams. Last but not least, I acknowledge and thank the contributions of PhD Chamber of Commerce and Industry and its team under the leadership of Dr. Jatendra Singh, the director, who stood with us and provided the organizing support. Above all, I am thankful to each of you who had taken your valuable time and participated with us. We assure you that another lecture in this series will be coming up in the next 3 months' time. Thank each and everyone once again. Thank you all.
Nice meeting.
इसको करिए वो लगा ले संग
Thank you, Dr. Kasturi Rangan.
It was a real pleasure listening to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So sorry there was a small hiccup in the system.
No,
In the beginning.
no.
Sorry.
The joy
Thank
of
you.
listening to you in any case. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for being here. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. We can see
Thank
you.
Thank you very much.